If you haven't watched part 1, please go and watch part 1 before continuing. Thank you very much. This part 2 of My Kingdoms from This World will be about nation building. And I need to explain one thing here. Nation, in worldly terms, is a coalition of people or peoples based on blood sacrifice. That is what a nation is on worldly terms. So nations in the world represent a coalition or colliding of people or peoples within a territory based on blood sacrifice. That's what a nation is according to the world. Now, the word nation in some contexts in the Bible can mean an ethnicity, a group of people that share the same genetic heritage. Now, all human beings have the same genetic heritage because we're all human beings. But an ethnicity is when people have similar physical features. For example, you have the Germanic ethnicity, or you can call them Caucasians or white people. You have the Mongolian ethnicity, which is quite light-skinned. You may have the Kenyan ethnicity. So you have ethnicities, and ethnicities are sometimes referred to as nations. But in the world, apart from scripture, a nation implies a group of people or peoples that are glued together emotionally and also financially through blood sacrifice. But that's a part that's often omitted. A lot of people, when they think of a kingdom, they think of things like this, based on Disney movies. It's because many people today grew up in republics. Now, what is a republic and what makes it different from a kingdom? Okay, let's go over here. Republic comes from two Latin words. Res, which means entity or concern. Hear that, entity. And then publicus, that means of the people. So an entity of the people or concern of the people. Res publica in Latin. In French is république, and in the late 16th century it became republic in English. So a republic is when the wealthy of a community or of an ethnicity come together and they decide what needs to happen in a community, but they all have their own interests involved. So they can't govern as a unity because you have too many interests. And because there is no vision of a man to give them a direction, which you have in a kingdom or an empire, they now need someone to preside over them. So they, amongst other, select a president to preside over their gathering. And the president will guide their discussions concerning what needs to happen in the community. And the people trust the president that the president will guide the rich farmers or those that own the industry. That is what a republic is. So a republic is similar to a business. That's why many businesses have presidents. You get it now? A kingdom, I explained before, is a territory where the vision of a man is exercised. And others collide with this vision. They have their own visions, but they submit their vision of the vision of the man to whom the territory is assigned. So now you know the difference between a kingdom or empire and republic. An empire is a territory that contains many kingdoms in it. For example, you had this nation, the German nation that was erected in the 19th century over a period of time, and they joined all the German kingdoms and small German states, except Austria, of course, because Austria was an empire already with Hungary. So they joined the remaining German territories under the leadership of the King of Prussia, and they established the German Empire. This was an empire. So this was a multi-nation because you had several small nations in it. The Prussians were a German-speaking nation. You had the Württembergers. You had the Bavarians. You had many German-speaking nations that collided together as a multi-nation. You get what I'm saying? So that's what an empire is. So you have a king that supervises other kings. And in an empire, you have often one of those nations that's dominant over the other nations. So that's what an empire is. A kingdom, I'm going to explain it here, is constructed based on the vision of a king. This was a late 18th century kingdom that Spain designed. And this nation exists till this day, even though today this nation, Venezuela, is not in a good state. But this nation came to existence in 1777, where King Carlos III joined these territories together, and he established institutions for them. And there are 4 pillars he used, or best said, the Spanish rulers of the Bourbon dynasty. And I'm using this nation here as an example to explain to you how nations are built and how we as believers can build nations in a different manner. Look, here you have the political pillar, the military pillar, the fiscal pillar or the financial pillar, and the judicial pillar. So this is the legal part, this is the financial part, the defense part, and the administrative part. All of these were located in Santiago de León de Caracas. It was the capital right over here. And these branches had their representatives in the provinces, and they administered the wealth and abundance of this region. And the people that lived here spoke Spanish, and they formed a unity. And why was this kingdom established? Though to a threat of an invasion. So I'm going to use this nation, which still exists till this day, as an example how the pagan rulers of this world established nations. Okay? So you had groups of people living over here. There were maybe around 700,000 people, not that much. They lived in several towns here and there. And also had the native Indians that lived in their native communities. And this region was part of the Kingdom of New Granada, which was a Spanish kingdom that was established somewhere in the late 16th century. But the distance between the people that lived over here in the East Caribbean and the people that lived more towards the Andes was that the people here were more focused on the Caribbean, and they were more focused on Europe because we were close to Europe also. But there were also many pirates or sea robbers that came over here. So the people who lived over here were under a threat. You could be kidnapped, you could be extorted by criminals, a lot of bad stuff could happen. So there was an actual threat to the people. What did the pagan rulers do? They exaggerated the threat by spreading fake news as if there was an invasion coming. So the people over there felt frightened. For the right reason, if an invasion is on its way, you don't want that to happen. So that was the problem that was presented to the people. There was already dissatisfaction because many of the people who lived over here felt disadvantaged. And they were. So the people wanted a new situation. So the King of Spain came with a situation. He will become a separate nation under the Spanish throne, with everything of your own. So that's what happened. They received their institutions, and this region functioned quite well. When Spain was under a threat from France, of course the big rulers orchestrated this. The people here joined together to form a unity. And that unity is extended till this day as a republic. But now they use other threats to keep this unity going. But so it's a problem reaction solution. So you create a problem, you offer a solution, people give in to the solution, and if one doesn't collide with the solution, it's perceived as an enemy. And those are sacrificed. And based on that class sacrifice, you glue the people of the community together. That's how Venezuela came into existence. The same with the German Empire. Yeah, the Kingdom of the Philippines, by the way, this nation exists still this day as the Republic of the Philippines, even though the Republic is smaller than how the kingdom used to be. Here it worked like this. The Spanish wanted access to China, because China had mass production. But the Chinese were a closed economy, a closed economic zone, and they perceived themselves as the center of the universe, as heaven on earth. That's how they perceived themselves. So in Asia, since the 3rd century BC, you had this Apollonistic structure called the Chinese Empire, and all the other kingdoms and chiefdoms around were required to pay homage to the Emperor of China, who was called the Son of Heaven. Okay? And the Korean ethnicity was dominant in the economics back then, and they remained that for a long period of time. Even though the Koreans were not really considered independent, so they could go through as Chinese because they spoke Chinese in their businesses. So understand that the Malay tribes that lived over here, they were dependent on the favor of the Korean and Chinese cartels. And yet the Tondro Kingdom, you had 2 sultanates, you had a confederation of small states also. So you had a group of islands, many groups of islands here, and they all had their local administrations. And they were in conflict with one another also, because the south was Muslim, yet a part that I believe also had the Hindu religion, and yet another part that had nature worship. So they had their issues, and yet the Chinese or Korean immigrants that exploited them. So that was their situation. A Portuguese man on behalf of Spain came and offered a solution to the situation. The solution was, by the way, you can read the history in depth if you want, but I'm giving it a brief here. The Portuguese man offered a solution to the local leaders, who were also devil worshippers. He gave an idea: why won't you all collide together under Spain? Because remember, the Chinese Empire also had white supremacy, but they used light-skinned Koreans and sometimes Mongolian people as their model for whiteness, which is based on Apollo. So the tribes here, which were not light-skinned at all, felt left out. And if you look at the geography of these groups of islands, they were a bit isolated, especially these ones over here. So when this white man from Portugal on behalf of Spain came with his ships and he offered them to be part of the Spanish Empire, which was ruled by a white man, the people here, not all of them of course, they felt acknowledged because there was an alternative for them. They didn't have to put up with those Chinese, those arrogant Chinese elites anymore. So over time, the Spanish came and they established a capital, which they later built another capital also. And Manila became the capital for biggest part of the history of this kingdom, and today is still the capital of this nation. They established a capital, they established institutions. The Cortes Generales was what you can say the national government, if you want to call it like that. So all the princes, chieftains over here became Spanish citizens, Roman Catholics. They also had to speak Spanish. Yet the Roman Catholic Church that established itself over here as the economic mediator. Yet Spanish financial institutions, they began to use the real, the Spanish currency. So there was unity and they had a purpose. The purpose was to transport goods from China, from the Qing dynasty or Qin dynasty towards the Americas, and from the Americas it will continue to Europe, in this case to Spain. So there was a purpose, and people collided with this purpose, and you had a king, King Philip of Spain, who was the man with the vision. That's why it's called the Philippines. Okay? Not going to talk too much about this guy over here, but I hope you get this, what I'm saying here. The Philippines came into existence as a kingdom. There was a man with a vision, and an ambassador was sent, and the locals agreed with this vision. They collided with it, and a country was established, and a nation was formed. In this case, the Chinese were perceived as a threat, and that was the threat that was used to sacrifice their own to establish this nation. And by the way, after this kingdom was established, you still had the Chinese and Korean migrants. They became a minority over here, and they were tolerated because they provided they provided wealth to the people, because now the Chinese Empire had to deal with the Spanish Navy. So goods came in through Manila, and from there they went to Spain. So there was a regulation and there was income. So every nation needs to have a purpose, okay, or else it cannot function. This was a 15th century, well, I won't say nation, but it later kind of became one. It exists today as the Dominican Republic. Spain didn't manage this one well, even though this was a very important kingdom for a while. You had this one, or I've spoken about this often in my parables. This was a quite successful one. Well, after independence, they destroyed their kingdom, they destroyed their nation. That's onto them. This was a nation established in the 14th century. There was a deal between a Chinese general and the emperor, and a ritual was conducted as a war in which he established his kingdom called Joseon. And that is what they call Korea, which is now divided into. Look here, the sun symbol. Multiple times. Sun rays. Here, another sun symbol, the royal coat of arms. Here the danger was the Chinese people, even though that was a hoax, because they all worship the beast. Okay? And over time, they established institutions that regulated the behavior of the people as well as their ideas of who they were. This nation, I won't say it failed, but it didn't work well. So one of the kings exalted it to an empire, and shortly afterwards the Japanese occupied it and it was demoted to a kingdom, and now it's divided into, it's a republic, of which the Northern Republic, what we today call North Korea, is a host country. Okay? And the host country of North Korea is only there to put fright on people that quote unquote live in South Korea, and that's how the nation is kept alive. There's another nation, by the way. A commonwealth is a country that's not entrusted with its own government. Folks, a commonwealth is a country that's ruled by another country, because the country itself cannot be trusted, or people don't want to allow this country to function separately. And it's in 1986 that Australia truly became independent, even though they had a constitution in 1901. Maybe I'll make a video about Australia separately, but this was a nation they didn't really expect. It wasn't planned, but they had to form it into a nation because the British Empire didn't want those British people there to participate in the British Empire. So by giving them the status of a nation in the form of a commonwealth, they were excluded from the British Empire, even though they were still run by the British Empire. You can still see the British flag in their flag, and here you can see the sun symbols over here. All beast worship. But okay, I've spent 22 minutes explaining worldly nation building. Why did I do that? Because when people think of nation building, they think of the myths that the world teaches them. Now, I'm here to tell you how nations are really constructed by the world, and it's based on blood sacrifice. All these kingdoms you see here, now many of these kingdoms are gone. The nation still exists in another form. For example, Australia as a kingdom exists still this day. The Korean Empire, the Korean Kingdom are gone, but you still have the Korean nation, and that's what you should understand. A kingdom can pass away, but a nation can remain. Okay? But nations in the world, which are based on blood sacrifice, can only last as long as the blood sacrifice is effective. The moment the blood sacrifice loses its glue, with glue I mean its hold on the people, you need to get another blood sacrifice. You need to come with another trauma. Because these nations of the world are trauma constructs. That's what they are. That's why Christ said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Because the nations of this world are established by kings who worship the beast. And those kings, with their gangs, they stir up the people towards violence against selected victims. The victims are killed or traumatized, and it's this trauma that binds everyone together. And every year they remember this form of collective violence. That's why you have national holidays. And by the way, a nation and a nation state are two different things. Spain established kingdoms, and you establish a kingdom because you want to have a nation. Okay, because people need to adhere, people need to identify with the king in order for it to be a kingdom. So you need to have a common language, you need to have common symbols, you need to have common institutions. So your a kingdom and a nation cannot exist separately from one another. A kingdom can pass away, but a nation can remain. For example, Venezuela in 1821 joined the Republic of Colombia. Well, they didn't really join, they were forced to, but afterwards, in 1830, it became a republic. It was still a nation, but it was not a kingdom anymore. And the Republicans that ruled it, they kept the trauma going, but had to change the story over time. They couldn't use the hoax of a maritime invasion anymore, because they were not part of the Spanish Empire, but they used other hoaxes to keep the population in a state of anxiety. And that's how they kept it going. So a kingdom can pass away, but a nation can remain for a while in the world as long as the blood sacrifice is effective. Now here's the good news, believers. We also built on blood sacrifice, but on Christ's sacrifice. We are, let me say like this, Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, that implies the blood of Christ, that's the only blood we should rely on. Let me repeat that. Believers only rely on the blood of Christ for their own lives, for their marriages, for their estates, for their businesses, their enterprises, for their nations, their kingdoms, their empires. We rely on Christ's blood, which will never lose its effect. Because the blood sacrifices of the world that established those nations, they are based on seeking relief. So it's really collective murder. That's what's going on. Christ's sacrifice was him absorbing the violence of humanity and overcoming it. So his bloodshed was a redemptive bloodshed. All other bloodshed is destructive, relief seeking. You get it? Look, as a believer, you build everything based on the blood of Christ. That's your foundation. These kingdoms over here, it doesn't matter how glorious they were, they faded away because they did not, something like this. They faded away because their basis was relief seeking. If they would have shifted their basis to Christ, they would have remained. They didn't. Well, this part has become much longer than I intended. Just realize that worldly nations are trauma constructs. Nations that believers establish are glory constructs. So you have trauma constructs and you have glory constructs. Christ said to his disciples, "Go you into the world and make of all nations my disciples." Now the nations that were on the world were trauma constructs. That's what they were. So what did Christ tell the disciples? Christ wanted his disciples to overtake the world and transform the world into a reflection of his glory. They were ought to be separate from the world, not participate in the blood sacrifice of the world. But at the same time, they ought to have a dominant influence in such a way that they transform the nation of the world into nations of Christ. That means those that are willing to be saved from the nations of the world. Okay? And you had glory constructs throughout human history, but it's a world. They didn't last. Let's say like this. When believers established communities that turned into nations based on Christ, Satan would come and hijack it. That's how many republics came into existence, when Satan hijacked what believers established. Because don't get things twisted here. Even though the nations of the world are trauma constructs, often the enemy hijacks and steals what believers established, and then Satan comes with his trauma, and he comes with his relief, and then Satan gets the credit for the trauma construct that has been established. And the trauma constructs receives a historical narrative that excludes what believers did. So, know that until Christ returns, till Christ returns, what believers do will often be hijacked and plagiarized by the enemy. Okay? Because you have trauma constructs, which are worldly nations, and you have glory constructs. There were glory constructs, and one thing, glory constructs only remain glorious because Christ is the center. If you have believers that move to North America, they establish a community that functions according to Christ's principles. That doesn't mean that everyone is perfect and all of that, but there is focus on Christ. And let's say that the King of Britain chases them, comes with his Apollonistic trauma, and he established a colony that turns into a province. What has happened? That British king with his gang hijacked what believers did. So now the British king gets the credit, but he didn't really do anything. And such things often happen in the world. Okay, in part 3, I'll continue talking about glory constructs, how we can establish glory constructs on the earth. And, well, keep agreeing with Christ. This part was to explain unto you how trauma constructs are kept alive. You should not be aligned with a trauma construct. You live in the midst of trauma constructs, but you're not part of them. Agree with Christ and be at peace.